Hi, I'm Dawn Montefusco, life coach for writers and creatives, and this is the Ultimate Writer Series, how to break through resistance, ignite your muse, and honor your soul's calling. And today we have a fabulous guest, Jacquelyn Fletcher. She's the founder of Heartwood Healing and the creator of the Heartwood Sanctuary and the Heartwood Self-Mastery programs. She's a motivational speaker, the award-winning author of 14 books, and the co-founder and host of the Healing Words television show administered by the Lavin Center for Humanities in Medicine at Mayo Clinic. Jacquelyn has trained and coached thousands of people at organizations including Mayo Clinic, United Health Group, Optimum Health, Weight Watchers, senior care communities, and many more. She's a healing touch practitioner and great story coach. Jacquelyn has been a mindfulness practitioner for 20 years, and you can find her at heartwoodhealing.com. Hi, Jacquelyn.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. That sounded so much fun to read.
You know, I've been busy.
Good. You're doing the work. Well, tell us what you're up to. Tell us about what projects you're working on these days.
You know, it is so funny. If you had asked me when I first started my life as a writer, if I would have ended up here, could never have anticipated what I'm doing these days. So what I'm working on now is I built a program called the Heartwood Self-Mastery Program that's really about resilience and how do we create humans who are lit up and magnetic. And what's so interesting is that in doing that work, I find myself getting on stages a lot and doing a lot of trainings and doing keynote talks and things like that. And I do them with spoken word pieces that really are poetry. They're narrative poems. And so I have what I'm so excited about right now is a new piece that I've just written called Healer's Rise that I just love. And
I just got chills.
You got chills. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's just a piece that I am getting on stages now. I'll be at Lincoln Center in October doing this piece, and I'm so thrilled. And I just never ever could have predicted that as a writer, you know, when I was back scrolling in my journals in second grade that I would appear. It's just, I'm blown away.
That's amazing. And how did you come to the healing aspect of writing? Just because, you know, reading your bio and knowing about you, there's this big piece of healing for you and writing and helping others break through the resistance of writing.
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, I think when I was a kid, I just wrote every kind of story I could possibly try. And I didn't come to healing, you know, right away. It took a little while. And of course, I started to use healing in my work because I needed it myself. And writing is this tremendous healing tool. There's tons and tons of research about how particular kinds of writing can be really healing. And so in my own work, the first kind of foray into using writing specifically for healing was in my own journals. And I just really found in my early days that my journals were my best friends. And I just could pour my heart out in those journals and really explore things inside myself that I needed to do the healing work that I needed to do. So I grew up a really overweight kid and was bullied as a kid. And in my 20s, I lost 100 pounds that I've now kept off for 20 years. And in that process, I would say I came to writing as a healing tool because, you know, in order to do that work, I really had to heal from the inside out. And writing was just an integral part of that.
Oh, that's phenomenal, actually. So one of the things I really love talking about is this thing called creative resistance, or just this thing called resistance. Stephen Pressfield writes about it in The War of Art, and we hear about it in Big Magic with Elizabeth Gilbert. And it's pretty much Anne Lamott writes about it in Bird by Bird. Natalie Goldberg writes about it. I think that every writer writes about the fact that they have this resistance to writing. And then they love to have written, right? That's a whole other thing. But I find that people, especially as we age, we get to this point where resistance takes on so many weird, kind of sneaky forms. Can you speak to the idea about like how creative resistance presents itself and how it's presented itself for you, or the people you work with, and how you get them past the resistance.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I, of course, have experienced resistance as a writer. This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but there was a time when, I was really looking at, I've had my own company for 18 years and as a writer and doing writing projects. And about 4 years ago, I really was feeling a sense of deep burnout. And I had this moment of like, I am not a writer. Who decided I was a writer anyway? Like, whose dream is this anyway? It's not my dream. I don't want to be a writer. I hate writing.
That's resistance.
Oh my gosh, completely.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I have absolutely struggled with resistance. I have sat at my desk all day long and not been able to write. I have gone for months and months and months without writing. And what I find is that for me, writing is, I had to get to this place. It's almost like I have to come up with all these tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And I have read all of those books that you talk about. And for me, I think where the resistance piece comes in is that I have to constantly be trying to find ways around myself. And so one of the ways that I did that when I was really experiencing this really intense burnout was that I said, okay, I have written a lot of books and I need to throw out everything I know about writing. Because the editor part of my brain had gotten so out of balance and so much larger than the creative part of my brain because I was doing it for a living. Mm-hmm. And so I gave myself this crazy idea popped into my head where I said, okay, I had been asked to write about my weight loss journey many, many times. My agent had asked me to do it. Like, I just couldn't do it. I'd tried. I'd written multiple formats of this story before, and I couldn't do it. And I said, I've got to throw out everything I know. And so I went on a trip and I wrote my entire story in haiku.
I love this.
There were 1,000 of them. And I set it to music. And so then this experience really helped me understand that for me to break through resistance, besides all the things that writers always say, like show up at the desk at the same time every day, and all of these things I've been practicing for years that suddenly stopped working for me. Yeah. What I had to do was really look outside writing. And to turn it back into like a creative endeavor. And so I started painting and taking classes on YouTube with painting. I took my iPhone and started learning about taking pictures. And I worked to kind of introduce just more creativity in general into my life. Yes. And that helped me break the resistance. And I work with a lot of clients on that, where we look at how are all of the ways in, and that writing is one vehicle, and it might be our favorite, but maybe we have to step away from it for a moment and return. Yes, creativity is creativity. Words are just a form of that. It's a form of expression, which gets me to my next question. Many people, I think, they get stuck because they're looking so far ahead, like, oh gosh, well, how am I going to get this published? And what if I don't get published? Or I know what I should write. My colleagues and whatever say, because I'm an expert in this or that, I should write this thing. And they start writing it and they kind of hate it. And they go, oh, obviously I'm not a writer. I can't stand writing about this, because they're not actually writing what they want to write. And then when you get to what they want to write, which could be way out there, or just a story from their childhood, or maybe it's poetry, or maybe they really want to write sci-fi or mystery novels. And then they go, oh my gosh, but where is that going to get me? Right? There's that whole, like, where is it going to get me? How would you, what do you think, how would you help someone that is being held back by shoulds, and to just do it to see where it leads? Because oftentimes trusting your heart does get you way further than doing your shoulds. Oh my gosh, absolutely. The shoulds are terrible. Yeah. They're so terrible, and they're dream killers. They are creativity killers. And so, yeah, I mean, for anybody who's dealing with the shoulds, and of course, I have absolutely had some giant shoulds on my shoulders. And, you know, for people who, because we always think there has to be an outcome. And, you know, it's so interesting because I think that in this culture, we really have this idea that we're supposed to be producing, we're supposed to be productive members of society. And writing is not always valued in the same way that, for instance, if you spend the same amount of time learning to be a surgeon, you will be valued in a much different way. And in my mind, that kind of cultural assumption of what is valuable makes these shoulds arise. And so in my view, this idea of getting beyond the shoulds requires us to be a little bit punk rock.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, I mean, we got to be rebellious. That's what writers are. That's what we are, the seers, right? We are outside observing things. I mean, that's part of the artist's role, right? In our cultural story. And so to get rid of those shoulds is a little bit, I don't know if I can say this on here, but a little bit badass.
Yeah,
right?
totally. Say whatever you want. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, you got to be badass to get there.
You do.
Yeah, I say it's the fuck it principle, you know? Like, come on, some guy just wrote, actually, I love him, Mark Manson. I remember Mark Manson when he was just doing a blog, and he wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And I remember that particular blog that he wrote. And I printed it out, and I was reading it and sending it to all my clients. And then someone, I think, dared him to make it into a book. And I thought, how is this guy going to make this one blog that went viral into a book? No way. And then it was a New York Times bestseller, you know? And I love it. It's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Mark Manson, whoop, whoop. Because you have to pick. He literally says the F-bomb so many times. You have to pick the F. You have to pick the fucks that you're going to give. I mean, he really.
That's awesome.
So yeah, no. And I think that, you know, we forget that we can, and here's the best part. It can take a haiku. It can take 5 minutes. It can take 3 minutes. It doesn't.
Absolutely right.
So yeah, speak to that, because a lot of people get really stuck with time.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I would say that, you know, a shift in perspective can happen instantaneously, like you're talking about. The first novel I ever wrote, and all of my books are nonfiction that are in print, but I have written many fiction pieces that have not seen the light of day. And the very first novel I ever wrote, I wrote in graduate school. And my professor was Andre Dubusse III, who is just this amazing human being. And I remember that one of the things that he taught me early on, and I'll share another one with you later on, probably in the conversation, because he is an incredible teacher. One of the things that he had shared with me is that if you're looking at an entire novel and revising a novel, people get so freaked out about that and the whole revision process. And he always said, you know, the revision process is a re-seeing, it's a revision of this piece. And he said, just one word can change the tone of an entire novel. And I've never forgotten that advice, that we think that in order to shift somehow, it's got to be this mega thing, but it doesn't. It can happen in a moment. It can happen with the haiku. It can happen with a flash of insight in the shower, right? And then everything shifts from there. And it really is a powerful thing that happens. So
yes.
Yeah.
No, I love that. The shift in perspective, and it happens in a second. It really does. Before we go any further, you are a meditation practitioner.
I am.
Can you speak a little to, I always, you know, in my classes and with my clients and my groups, I often use the analogy that writing is akin to exercise and meditation, that you get to start again every moment, and it takes practice. That if you do it every day, even for a little bit a day, you will calm the mind in terms of meditation. It'll get you a lot, the benefits of meditation have been now well received and acknowledged, even in, thank God, Western medicine. But even in exercise, like if you like, oh yeah, I'm going to go run a marathon tomorrow, you know, you're like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But if you do a little bit every day, there's a possibility that you will at least build up the stamina to run a half a marathon, you know? And people take it for granted. I mean, really take it for granted that somehow they think if they save all the thoughts on writing and they sit down for 2.5 hours, it's going to be equal to the writing every day. So can you talk about meditation and writing and maybe how they're similar?
Yeah, absolutely. They are very similar. The first, and you said this, right out of the gate, I would say they are both disciplines.
Mm.
They are something that we have to practice every day. And just like with meditation, where people think, oh my gosh, I have to sit down and meditate for 30 minutes or an hour on a pillow. That is one form of meditation, and people are a little bit scared of it. But there are all sorts of other ways to bring mindfulness and meditation into our lives. And the research, like you said, there are thousands of studies now that show how good this is. It changes the brain, changes our perspective on life, changes our ability to self-regulate. And what's so interesting is we can do that in these little micro moments all day long. And I'll never forget when I don't teach writing anymore very often, but when I did a lot, there was a woman that I was working with who had, she had a book deal with a really big publisher. And she had a husband who had a business that provided for them. So she didn't have to work. And she had her entire days free so that she was going to write this book, and it was going to be awesome.
That's rough.
Right? So what happened, of course, this won't be a surprise, is that she came to me a year after her book had already been due. So she had missed her deadline by a year with a very large publisher. And she came to me and she was just, talk about shame spiral, right? I mean, just in this huge, she was beating herself up day after day after day for not showing up at the desk. And so I said, well, and she's like, every day I plan to sit down for 3 hours and to write. Doesn't do it. Something else gets in the way. She's procrastinating. The resistance is fierce. And I said, well, what's the smallest amount of time that you could write? And so I said, can you show up and write for 3 minutes a day?
Yes.
And she said, well, I could probably do 10. And so, by gosh, she wrote that book in 10 minutes a day. And she finally turned it in another year late, but got it published and the whole thing. And I'll never forget that because, it is this practice, it's a discipline, but sometimes we kind of do this thing in our heads where we screw ourselves up because, again, of those huge shoulds.
Yeah.
That we just get ourselves in these tizzies instead of just taking these little baby steps. Like, yes, I can write one sentence today.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so true. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about God, which universe, or I call it the fabric. I love calling it the fabric. It's all of the connections. We are all connected. When we're being creative, when we're writing, writers who are called to write, right? So not everyone's called to write. I always say, some people go to a museum and they get itchy to go get canvas and paint and they're losing their minds. I don't ever feel that way. I go to a museum, I love it. But if I'm in a cafe and I hear things or I go to a poetry reading, all of a sudden I'm getting itchy, to run home and write. So we all have our things. I have an architect friend, he looks at certain houses and he's like, oh, I got a new idea. I'm like, I don't do that. So we have these like callings, and I feel that when I'm writing, regardless of what I'm writing, journaling, poetry, nonfiction, taking a stab at fiction again, that there's this thing what we call igniting the muse, that when you show up every day as a discipline, there's a strange connection to the fabric, to God, to universe that happens, and things start to fall into place in other areas of my life. But when I'm not following that, things seem a little wonky. Do you feel that when you're writing, or whatever the calling is at the moment, but when you were writing, did you feel that things were falling into place a little bit better, that the muse had been ignited and it was serving a bigger purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I really feel strongly that the creative act is a divine act.
Yeah.
And that meditation and prayer are divine acts. And that the ability to, researchers call it the flow state, right? Where it's this kind of this time and space where we completely forget ourselves because we're so immersed in what we're doing. And that for me is when I'm connected, when writing is its best, right?
Yeah.
When I feel that the work that I'm doing is serving a larger purpose, that is when for me writing is amazing and awesome, and I love it and I want to do it, and it's joyful and it's creative and it feels really fun. There are times when I don't feel that with writing, and in those moments typically it is because I have started to judge the process in some way. And so for me, if I just, so every time I write, every time I come, I'm actually looking over here in this other part of my office. I have this little, desk set up on the entrance to my office with all of these very meaningful pieces on it. And I have a candle that I light every morning. And when I come in, I just do this little ritual, this sacred ritual that connects me to my sense of, higher purpose. And where I just say, use me as a vehicle on this planet for healing in whatever form that decides to take. And then before I sit down to write again at the desk, I do that kind of same connecting in that I do whenever, and there's a little saying that I will often say, as I will say, may this work be for the highest good of this people that read it, or that it reaches, or may it reach the people who need it. And I just make these little prayers as I'm doing the work. And what that does for me is that it connects me to, it takes me outside of fear.
Yes.
It takes me outside of what are people going to think. And it allows me to feel like this process is something bigger than myself.
Nice. Yes.
Now, I wasn't able to do that, however, until I had used writing. I think there's different phases of writing.
Yes.
And one of the phases, the early phases of writing is, it's like, why am I doing this piece? Am I doing this to heal myself? And that is one type of writing. And for me, as I evolved as a writer and matured as a writer, I had to understand the difference between writing for me and writing to heal my own wounds, or whatever the reason was, and writing for other people. And those are two different things.
Yes.
And sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. And so for me, that's really the journey I think I have taken on all of these years, where I did not do this plugging in to a higher source when I was writing, when I was doing it from my place of wounds and healing. And so now it's a much different voice that's emerging when I write.
That's awesome. That just felt good to hear. What inspiration would you like to leave the viewers with? You had mentioned you had some other thing to say about that wonderful professor that you worked with.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I finished my very first novel in this class, and I walked in to his office, and I remember I had printed it out. It was like, this huge manuscript, and I dropped it on his desk, and I was like, I did it. And he shook my hand, and he never read it, by the way, never read it. I never got feedback on it from him. He never read it. But what he did has stayed with me forever. He shook my hand and he said, now you have done something that 85% of the people who say they want to write a book have done. You have finished it. Yeah. And he said, and because you have finished it and you have finishing energy, I know I will, yes, right? I know I will see your books on the shelves someday.
Oh.
Because I had finishing energy.
Oh.
I have never forgotten.
I got so many chills. I have a particular coach who I love, and she's helped me tremendously over the years. She says, you have to finish what you start. I don't care what it is. So she had me do some of these interview series. I remember my first one, I was terrified. Oh my God. And it was called Write Because It Matters. She goes, I said, well, what am I going to call it? She goes, what are you struggling with? What are you struggling with? I was like, well, I don't know if writing matters anymore. This was 4 years ago. But to me, right? Like I was struggling with my sense of, does it even matter? And so, she goes, but if you start this interview series, you have to finish. She's like, and I wrote a book of poetry, and I won a big award for poetry, and then I stopped. I just froze. I did half books, She's like, forget about the books. Cause I was like, I can't do an interview series and I didn't finish a book yet, which I have since done. But she goes, no. Ask the question, but you have to finish the series. And I was like, what is with this finishing word? You're just knocking me over with finishing. She says, you don't know what's on the other side. She goes, you have to learn that the finishing muscle is a muscle that will apply. And so she had me start to remember other things I had finished. You know, what have you started and finished? And I said, well, I was a competitive rock climber for a while, and there were certain things that I had finished. You know, I said, I'm going to go do this, and I did this, or college, or whatever it was. But she's like, well, you got rusty. You stopped finishing. And so then she's like, you know, it's a muscle, you know, like, and I try to tell my writers, and I've seen it happen, and it's almost bizarre. People who are just like, I don't know, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going. And they finish. And all of a sudden, they get the editor, and they decide how they're going to publish, because now it doesn't matter. If you want to be published, be published. I just had a conversation with a very famous spoken word poet named Shane Koisen. Huge.
Oh, I love his work. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so he and I are pals. And so we were hanging out, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And I was getting to the finishing much. So his new book is so, like, the pre-sales are so out of control. And I said, and then we were chatting about it. He goes, well, I got a publisher. Don't get me wrong. The publishing companies want me. So I said, yes. He says, for a $24 book, I got $1.24 for each book. He said, I scrapped traditional publishing as fast as I could, and I do my own self-publishing, and I get to keep 75% of the royalties. He's like, and I can use it to do more tours. He's like, I got this covered. It's way easier. And I was like, whoa. So it was a confirmation of what I've heard, but it's always bizarre to get confirmed on that again, you know? And so I tell people, so my writers who have finished, and they thought they were all going to go traditional. They genuinely thought, like, nah, this is the way you do it. By the time they finished and they did their research, they wound up hiring self-publishing coaches who get them, you know, the algorithms and the things on Amazon, because they want to affect more people faster. And they want to be able to promote their books the way they want to promote their books. And so the thing about finishing now is, now they're not even concerned with their books. They're writing their second book, you know? And I remember when they first started, they couldn't have even imagined that idea. But now this feeling of relief, finishing is possible. But that is a great, great point, you know, that there is such a thing as finishing. And the handshake, I'll never forget that image of the handshake he gave you. That was fabulous.
Oh, it was awesome. And I am completely in agreement. I mean, publishing has changed so tremendously since I got started.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've been published by so many different kinds of publishers, you know, from HarperCollins to the smaller guys. And then I started my own publishing company a couple of years ago, because I was like, why? You know, there are certain kind of strategic reasons that I might someday do another book with a big publisher, but right now, finishing and getting it out into the world, like, I think that's our job right now, is to be, and like, I remember Poe Bronson had said it this way. He said, we have to be responsible stewards of our words. And I loved that, because what that means is that we have to get it into the hands of the people who need it. And the other thing I've really been working with people a lot lately too, is to really challenge them to ask themselves, is it even a book?
Right. Yes.
Because people are so tied to this idea that a book is credibility, that a book means I've made it, that a book, you know, is this kind of measure of your value, when absolutely not. I mean, it could be a spoken word piece. It could be a video. It could be a podcast. The vehicle is less important. And there's so many ways we can do it now that, you know, and to just think about the creativity behind that. What would be fun? What would be joyful to do? Like, that's where I'm really interested in looking now and challenging people to think in that way.
That's interesting you say that. It's incredible. My signature program is called Create Your Dream Book, right? And some people are like, why is it Create Your Dream Book? And I said, because I don't care. Get it out of this idea that it has to be 200 pages and it has to have this and this and this and this. Maybe your dream book is 40 pages long. Maybe it's just vignettes. Maybe it's just 1,000 haiku. You know, maybe it's a children's book. Maybe it's got more pictures. Maybe, and then here's the best part. Someone is going to link MP3s of her mother's voice reading some of the poems, who's dead, in French, because she's got her mother as the part of the character of a memoir. And I was like, so great, let's have a website with this short book, and then we can actually listen to your mom if that's something. She's like, oh my God, I never even thought of that. And I was like, there's a dream books are different now. And then, like you said, even though I'm calling it a book, you know, and it could be the beginning of a podcast or spoken word or whatever, but stretching and getting out of all that traditional stuff is what's making it more and more accessible to the people who need to hear it. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, I completely agree. You know, there was a book that I wrote. It's been one of my most successful books. It's called Dear Body, Love Me. And it's a piece that I wrote that's, you know, it's really a manifesto of self-love and acceptance of the body. And it's a narrative poem. And in order to make the book, what I did was I first wrote it, you know, longhand in a journal. And then I took these canvases and I painted these canvases and I hand stamped the book one letter at a time. So it was this very meditative process. So I combined my mindfulness training into this process. And then once that was finished, what was really interesting is that I saw myself reading this book like at a TED Talk.
Oh, wow.
So I went to a friend of mine and I said, hey, this is this manuscript of this piece I've been working on. I would love it if you would take some pictures of women and have them hung behind me on stage, because she's this amazing photographer. And she said, I just want to make sure I understand that you want to get up on stage and, you know, read a poem about your body and hide your body behind a podium.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And she called me out on it. And I thought, appropriately. And she is also a choreographer and a dancer. And she said, why don't you record the sound of your voice reading this poem, and I will choreograph a dance and we will dance it. And that is what we did. And we have been on now stages all over the place, including, we're going to do this piece also at Lincoln Center in October. And, you know, you could not have said to me, Jackie, this is what you're going to be doing.
Yes. Oh, this is so great.
And so, you know, writing, if it's connected to your heart and connected to your purpose, and I think connected to joy, and what is fun.
Totally.
Then, I mean, the world, who knows what you're going to do with it?
It is a big deal it is a big deal to spread joy. It is a big deal. Yes. You have a free gift for us because we're out of time, and I would talk to you for hours. Tell us a little bit about your free gift that you have for the audience.
Sure, absolutely. So if you go over to heartwoodhealing.com/subscribe, there is, when you sign up for my newsletter, you actually get 2 free pieces. So one is this video that I did. It's a video training on stress, because what I find with writers happens so often is that this resistance really builds up the stress response. And so the video is some of the fastest ways I know to bust through this stress response. And I make a complete idiot of myself in the video on your behalf, just for you guys, for your benefit. And so that's the first one. And then the second free gift is this other piece that I keep hearing from people who, you know, because a lot of what I talk about is when we develop self-care and self-compassion, it can really help us bust through a lot of these pieces of resistance and help that kind of inner critic voice that can pop up when we're writing. And so the other piece that I wrote that I offer is this PDF that's a self-care script. And it's all of these practices that come out of research that show how you say no to other people and how you set boundaries around self-care.
Oh, yes.
So that is the second one.
I find that, I find that's especially true for women with their boundaries, with the families and this and that and the other thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It was so great.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. This is just a joy. I always love talking to writers. They're my kindred spirits. It is so important, the gifts that you're bringing and helping them get their words out into the world. So thank you for doing this work.
Oh, you're sweet. Well, you have a fabulous day out there.
I will. You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.